Exactly when writing first appeared in the world, and where, is still a controversial subject. Writing, as I am sure you know, consists of graphic marks put onto some kind of surface to represent human speech. It probably was created from the human desire to store information in some way and then present it to someone at a distance, in space or in time. Writing is a contrivance, and there wasn't only one way of doing it. When searching for the beginning of writing, we need to differentiate between it and symbols. Symbols can perform a similar function to writing, such as indicating ownership of something, and it might look kind of like a piece of writing. Before we get to writing, we have pictorial messages and later proto-writing, that is, efforts to convey information by using graphic symbols, but these symbols are used as memory tools to invoke ideas, rather than as indications of the sounds of speech. So, for example, we have cave art from the Paleolithic period, or the reliefs on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe. These undoubtedly convey information, but they are not intended to be sounded out, as we would when we read. We also have the signs of graphic symbol inventory, which is the use of signs to represent things, usually things that someone might own or sell or buy. But these are not yet writing. We would consider them forms of proto-writing. Full writing did not come about until people fulfilled their need to record not merely lists of goods, but the complete expressions we make from our mouths every day. Anything we could say, we should also be able to represent graphically, and once we can do that, we have invented writing. Writing is truly writing when it systematically represents speech. So, then who was the first to be able to fully articulate speech, every sound we make in language, graphically? When I say, who, I mean what society or culture. And then we can investigate what specific people were involved. But I am afraid we have a couple of mysteries on our hands here. Answers to neither of these questions are easily found. But historians of this subject still lean towards the idea that writing originated independently in different parts of the world. Yes, there still would have been a diffusion of the invention from one place to another, but there wasn't necessarily a single origin point, rather several origin points. And the reason for this is because some writing systems are rather different from one another. The similarities we see between systems may be because it was a response to similar social conditions. But this is not a conclusion all scholars accept. Some believe that the idea of writing itself was the brainchild of one culture and that all others, even if they didn't copy the form of writing, nevertheless borrowed the idea itself. Some people say that no one invented writing, that instead it simply came about gradually through the adaptation and conversion of earlier systems of record-keeping, which in turn came from earlier prototypes. I mentioned symbols before and how this might not be writing, but we should also keep in mind that often in its early stages, scripts are composed of logographic symbols. Symbols that correspond to a word. But for us to conclude that it is writing, we need more than a couple of symbols. We need a writing system. Now you might say, isn't this settled? We all know it was the Sumerians who invented writing. But there is dispute about it. So, we're going to look at the possible candidates and see what's what. So, let's look at Mesopotamia first. Writing there appears to have developed out of a token system, the use of clay 3D symbols, representing numerals and commodities that were kept in spherical containers. It was a way of keeping track of inventory. But some of the symbols we see used in this system appear to have carried over into writing later, so that is why we think that the tokens led to the writing, although not everyone agrees. But in southern Mesopotamia, right around 3200 to 3000 BCE, we have our earliest evidence of writing, and I don't mean cuneiform. The earliest writing is with pictographic signs. These signs at first represented things, but it wasn't long before they started representing speech. And then around 2800 BCE or so, the pictographs developed into the wedge-shaped writing we know as cuneiform. Cuneiform was used at first to represent the Sumerian language, but then soon it was used to represent other languages, such as Akkadian, and later Hittite. How does Egypt compare? Well, the earliest examples from Egypt found so far are from the cemetery of Abydos, and specifically in Tomb Uj, the tomb of a regional ruler, maybe even an ancestor of Narmer. The tomb dated to about 3150 BCE. So, this is around the same time as the earliest writing in Mesopotamia. In the tombs were found small bone labels. They have numbers on them, and interpreters think they indicate cloth sizes. And there are hieroglyphs on posts, but only up to 4 signs. These are not complete sentences, so we still don't have examples of full writing. However, the pot marks seem to be standardized, and that suggests the commodities were being handled by a centralized administration, and there are commodities that were imported from the Levant. So, we might surmise they had ways of communicating with foreign countries and recording transactions. But again, this does not mean the signs are sounded out, that they represent speech. Not long later we get ink inscriptions on pots, which represent royal names. Now here's the thing. The names were probably sounded out. So yeah, we don't have complete sentences, but wouldn't the fact that the names were sounded out indicate that we are already at a point in history when signs were representing speech? Is this not writing? From the early First Dynasty, around 3050-2950 BCE, we have a bunch of bone labels that record years and commemorate notable events. So again, although we haven't found inscriptions with full sentences, we didn't have that until the Third Dynasty. It would seem as though writing was being used by the Egyptians at this point. It is reasonable to conclude that their writing appeared around the same time as that of the Mesopotamians. For a long time, the oldest surviving example of writing from China were from the period of the Shang dynasty. The surviving writing appears on bronze ceremonial vessels and on oracle bones. All the Shang inscriptions, well over 100,000 of them, come from Anyang, the capital city of the late Shang dynasty from the 14th to the 12th century BCE. And yes, these inscriptions, although somewhat abbreviated, do represent speech, so we can say that China, for sure, had writing at this point. The inscriptions are ceremonial in nature, but it is reasonable to suppose that more utilitarian uses for writing existed. Remember, it is probable that most writing, in all of these cultures, was probably placed on perishable materials. These are not likely to have survived. Chinese legend says that a man named Kangjia, who lived in the time of the Yellow Emperor, around 3000 BCE, invented Chinese writing. But recent finds have suggested that writing was in development in China long before that. Pottery inscriptions belonging to the Dawenku culture, around 4300–2500 BCE, were found with symbols. They may simply be symbols, they could be proto-writing, they could be writing. But without more finds, we cannot know. The Yang Shao culture has given us some examples too. Signs are found on a bunch of their potsherds. And other cultures like it nearby have as well. These sites are even older, coming from the period around 5000 to 4500 BCE. At Jiahu were found 349 graves, which contained many artifacts. Some individuals were buried with tortoise shells, which seem to indicate they were of some special status. The shells were incised with signs. 11 different signs were found on them, well 9 on the shells, and 2 more on bones. Carbon dating indicates the signs date to the period 6600 to 6200 BCE. Analysts have drawn 2 conclusions about these signs. 1. That they seem to have a link with later Chinese characters. 2. They are not yet full writing. 2. Still, we can see the beginnings here. The earliest evidence for actual writing in China comes from 2 places. One is in the Longshan culture, which existed in the Shandong Peninsula. The writing is in cursive style. It dates to between 2500 and 2000 BCE. And the other is the Liangzhu culture in southeast China, dating to 3300 to 2200 BCE. There we found groups of signs on pottery. These signs are not pictographic. They are written in continuous sequence. Neither of these scripts has been deciphered, and so we do not know if either is a direct predecessor of the script we find from the Shang dynasty. There is a gap of about 600 years. But we can call them writing, and this makes it possible that at least the writing seen in the Liangzhu culture appeared around the same time as Mesopotamia and Egypt. Now you may know that the earliest script in South Asia is that of the Indus Valley civilization, which existed in what is now India and Pakistan. There are some scholars who have proposed that the Indus script is not, in fact, writing, but rather just symbols, that they were not for representing speech. But I think the majority still believe that we are looking at a real writing system. Nevertheless, until we find some long sentences, this cannot be established for certainty. What are our earliest examples of the Indus script? The script can be found mostly on seals that come from the mature Harappan period, beginning around 2600 BCE. But at the site of Raman Dairy in Pakistan, numerous pottery sherds were found, and on them signs were inscribed. These signs look like antecedents of the Indus script. These date to the early Harappan period, 3300–2600, but they appear to be proto-writing rather than writing. So, the Indus Valley civilization is just a little bit behind Mesopotamia and Egypt, but not by much. Some of you may be wondering about the earliest writing in the Americas. The earliest evidence for it comes from Mesoamerica on stone monuments on Monte Alban from the Zapotec culture, approximately 500–400 BCE. So, this is comparatively late. But keep in mind that writing could still go back earlier, and there is some reason to believe that the earlier Olmec culture may have had it, but the evidence is inconclusive. We will have to wait and see. But we are not done here. There also is evidence that comes out of the Balkans. I am referring to what people call the Vinca script, which is named after the Vinca culture, which existed there in the Neolithic period, about 5400–4500 BCE. When the first Vinca symbols were discovered back in the 1870s, the conclusion drawn at the time was that it was a precursor to writing, but not writing itself. The reason is because most of the artifacts that had symbols, figurines, spindle whorls, and some other small objects, contained only a few symbols. And the symbols appear to have been pictograms. Then in 1961 in Tartaria in Romania 3 baked clay tablets were discovered with symbols on them. There has been difficulty dating the Tartaria tablets, as they are now called, because they underwent a heating treatment, which made carbon dating impossible. There is some dispute over the stratigraphical layer in which the tablets were found. But they seem to come from the Vinca culture, so they are generally dated to the same period. The whole question of the date of the Vinca culture has been contentious, due to debates about carbon dating and stratigraphy, and the authenticity of the Tartaria tablets has been called into question. But the consensus now seems to have settled on the dates 5400–4500 BCE for the Vinca culture. The Gradeshnica tablets are another example of writing that have been found in the region, this time in Bulgaria. Carbon dating placed it at around 5200 BCE. Unfortunately, the tablet still has not received full academic publication. I hope someday soon this mystery will be solved. Please subscribe and press the bell icon, it will us to grow together.